Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willis, your host. Today, we're honored to have James B. Lockhart III, former Principal Deputy Commissioner and COO of the Social Security Administration and a member of President Bush's Management Council, who is the author of the award-winning book, America Underwater and Sinking. Ouch. And is currently Senior Fellow of the Bipartisan Policy Center, discusses the current state of Social Security, possible cuts and that may be coming, and who will be impacted by most of the changes by Social Security. It's my honor, it's my pleasure to have you here. James, how are you doing today?
That's fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. First of all, tell me a little bit about the genesis of your book. That's an interesting title. I think it's apropos, but it's sort of depressing. Go ahead.
Well, it's about my government career mainly. And my first government career was as an officer on a nuclear ballistic submarine, hence the underwater.
Right.
But I ran four major government agencies over the years, and all of them have had problems, significant problems. And in many ways, they were underwater as well. For President Bush 41, HW, I ran the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which was having significant difficulties dealing with a lot of bankruptcies of airlines, steel companies. And then, as you mentioned, I was the number two at Social Security when President Bush 43, W, tried to get Social Security reform. And, as he wrote in his book, he touched the third rail of politics and he was toast. And then I was not able to escape government. Most of my career has actually been in the private sector, investment banking, insurance companies, and things like that, risk management. But then they asked me to be the regulator in 2006 of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And so I put them in conservatorship, went through the whole global financial crisis. And, housing was underwater big time. 25% of the houses in this country had mortgages higher, so that they were underwater. And so I went through that and actually spent about 8-9 months in the Obama administration trying to right the housing market. And we eventually did. But the next thing in my book title is It's Time to Surface. And that's sort of the message in my book. Yes, we're underwater and sinking, but it's time to surface, and Congress and the administration have to get together to try to, help us surface.
Now, let me just kind of get off to a caveat here, because earlier you said I did most of my work in the private sector and then you went into government. Let me tell you, your most honorable work that you've done is work that you've done for the people, and that was in the government sector. So I think I don't know. I find too many people not realize how important that job is to be in the public sector, doing good for us all. So thank you for that. And I think it is so much more important. Now, Social Security, you worked, I don't want to necessarily touch on TARP and all these particular issues, because we can get into some ideological problems that I don't want to get into. But Social Security is something that we can actually tackle. And my question to you is, what do you see as the problem within the Social Security system that really has it underwater?
Well, I mean, the major problem is us baby boomers have been retiring and then continue to retire at a very rapid rate, and we're not getting enough young workers. So the demographics have changed pretty dramatically. And, both President Biden and former President Trump say they're going to protect Social Security, but they don't mention that in 9 years, and CBO just came out with these numbers last week, in 9 years, we will have a 25% cut of benefits across the board. And if we want to keep paying that, that's $500 billion extra in deficit every year after 9 years. So it's a major problem we have. Demographics are the major cause, but I would say the secondary cause is the lack of will in Congress and administrations to try to fix it. The last major reform was in 1983 when President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill agreed on the Greenspan Commission. President Clinton tried Social Security reform, and as we mentioned, President Bush tried very hard. I mean, I did probably 100 events around the country, and all the young people wanted Social Security reform, and the people that weren't going to be touched were the ones that were against it. Bush said no one over 55 would be touched, and yet AARP and other groups came out against it. It's unfortunate. So yes, it's the demographics, but it's also the political will. So it's a two prong issue at this point.
I think the political will occurs because it's something that a large percentage of voters don't want, right? I mean, that's politics, right? But I want to ask a more fundamental question. Do you know what people actually receive monetarily for Social Security?
Well,
you are the second in charge of Social Security.
Yeah, it's all over the place. But one number I've seen is when it's cut in 9 years, just 9 years, the average family of two will have about a $17,000 cut in benefits, and that's a pretty big cut. So
wait, I don't get that. I don't think. Where did you get 17,000? I'm just curious because I mean, right now the person that gets the most in Social Security is, let's just call it around $3,000. If we cut by 25%, that turns out to be what?
No, well, I mean, it's more than that. I think you can get it either around 50 or so, and you can also, your spousal benefit can be half of that.
Right.
So you can get up really high numbers, and so yeah, the 17,000 is about 25% of what the benefits would be in 9 years for an average couple.
Right.
And it's a relatively big number, but the average couple is not really the problem. It's the lower income people they're really going to be hurt because you read numbers and that close to half of the people rely on Social Security for almost half their income at retirement,
if not all.
And that is a major problem, and any Social Security reform has to look at that as well. I think we need to increase benefits for the lower income, but we need to slow down benefits, the numbers that we were just talking about, for the higher income.
Now, when we look at Social Security, there's this stuff known as a cap, right? In other words, if I am making over, I think it's 140 or 100, I don't have the exact number, my Social Security is capped, right? And it seemed to me, and please, as the expert in the building, tell me why it is that we just don't do what we do with Medicare, and that is to have all income taxed by Social Security, and then more than likely we could actually even drop the Social Security tax rate. What is the inherent problem with that?
Well, there's a couple problems. One is that I'll agree that the tax max is too low now and it needs to be raised. There's no doubt about it. I'm not sure I would go the unlimited because we have a benefit formula that you get benefits for what you put in. And that would mean that, if you kept the present day formulas, people would be making many hundreds of thousands of dollars of Social Security income. So we have to change the formula. My suggestion is we do increase the tax max and probably continue. It's goes up with inflation, but we should probably have it go up more than inflation every year. But I think the issue a lot of people say is that if you're going to pay into Social Security, you should get something out of it. And so that's the trade-off you need to work out. I think there's things we could do for the formula, but the numbers are quite large, like 12% between you and your employer. So that's a pretty big number to take out of the U.S. economy, and so we got to be a little careful about that as well.
Let me do a little challenge here. And by the way, we do want to talk about your book, and not only do we want to talk about your book, I want everybody to go out there and buy your book, because when we're talking these serious issues, I think we should have all sides speak and be frank about the things that they're talking about. And one of the things that concerns me is something that you just said that I think is pretty important. You said how we define Social Security. We define Social Security as a benefits program that you put in something to get something out of it, right? under that concept, I don't know that it should have been called Social Security, right? Because I think Social Security should be something that says, as a member of society who works and keeps this economy going, if you come onto hard times or you're older or whatever, that our economic system owes you something back. And I shouldn't even say owes you something back, but that is how we flow. And the other concerning thing that I have is that, let's say you're a teacher and somebody else is a stockbroker. Uh, that teacher, I think, has so much value for society. I think you would agree. That stockbroker, maybe not so much. And well,
Yeah.
correct me.
Yeah.
No, no, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'd like you to tell me where I'm failing here.
Well, I think, first of all, if you go back to the beginning of Social Security, that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
Right.
as you know. And he's had a quote, and I'll probably get this wrong, but it's something along the line: if you pay into Social Security, they'll make sure that no damn person takes away your benefits. So he always thought of it as a, pay in and get benefits out, and that's what, maybe the name is wrong,
Right.
but that's how the system was always designed. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a pension, but we also have formulas in there buried in them that most people don't understand. That lower income people do get a lot more what they put in versus an upper income, because there's bend points. So it does have some of that. And of course, the other piece of Social Security is disability, and that's incredibly important for so many Americans in working age that become disabled for one reason or another. So there is that social service event in it as well, and certainly it's not a means tested program, but it is a program that does give higher percentage benefits for people that are lower income.
My daughter is 32. My daughter did all the right things. She went to a 4-year college. She then took a few courses and then went to medical school. She got, while in medical school, a stroke number one. She got over that stroke. She went ahead and worked hard and finished her medical degree. She got her degree, but she got a second stroke right before she finished her next semester. And she's at home living with us right now, still recovering. She gets, because of the profession she chose, she hadn't gotten a chance to work in society, right? And therefore does not qualify for Social Security disability, right? And I could name a whole, and again, like I said, she did her part as far as studying to be a doctor, etc. We can name a whole lot of these scenarios because we have all these tests within these systems that really I consider unfair to people. Now, the reason I mentioned earlier that I don't think we should call what we have Social Security, and what we really need is Social Security. You're an expert that worked in that department, and people in that, I try to make the case that I think we're doing it all wrong. People like her, she isn't falling through the cracks. She is the crack, right?
Yeah, no, I understand that, because you're right that to get Social Security disability, you need 40 quarters, 10 years of work.
Right.
And that is a crack. Now, there is another program that Social Security administers that's not part of the Social Security Trust Fund, called Supplemental Security Income. And that is a program for lower income people that don't qualify for Social Security disability to get benefits. It's a tough program because there's all sorts of means testing and all sorts of other issues in it. But that is actually funded directly from the government, and that definitely is a social benefit.
Benefit, yeah. Not something that you had to put something into. Though my contention is that the fact that you're an American, spending in America and being a part of the American system, you are, I know a lot of folks don't like to see it that way, but I feel that I don't know have you ever driven in a poor area in the country, let's say in Appalachia or somewhere?
Yeah, I've driven through them and stopped occasionally. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, live in a suburb of New York, and there's certainly some poor areas in New York City.
Yeah,
And
the reason I bring that up is what you find is these are hardworking people. They just don't command the salaries that would have them earned these benefits that many of us talk about. And, that always brings me into this department. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about your book. Tell me about when you wrote that book, understanding your book is vast. I couldn't read everything. I could just read experts. I mean, you went through TARP, all these subjects that I've gone through, subjects that I wanted to hold all presidents and say, why is it that you created a TARP? Why is it that those people who created the problem didn't pay for the problem and the person who didn't know did? I don't think your book necessarily was there to explain that, but explain that for me. Why is it that the people who actually were causal in the problems never seem to suffer a thing, and people that go into the system protects these guys? We can.
Well, if you're talking about the conservatorships of Fannie and Freddie and TARP, and I was on the TARP oversight board.
Yeah.
The point was the economy was in free fall. Yes, it was a problem of a very messy mortgage market, investment banks and other banks doing some very bad lending, packaging securities that never should have been packaged, including subprime mortgages.
Oh yeah,
mortgages that had no underwriting. People didn't have any income and got a mortgage. People would get mortgages that would have 2 years of very low rates and then 28 years of very high rates.
Yeah.
When that happened, people couldn't afford their mortgages, and then the housing prices tanked. As I said, they were 25% underwater, and neighborhoods were, starting to really suffer. Even if you're paying your mortgage, if the house next door got foreclosed, mm-hmm. your house prices went down dramatically as well. So there was a Main Street problem. I mean, it was a real Main Street and all across America problem. It was hard to fix. I mean, we did a lot of mortgage programs, including one out of TARP, that helped modify 3 to 4 million mortgages that helped people stay in their homes. At Fannie and Freddie, we did a refinance plan. As mortgage rates came down, we let people refinance their program, even though they didn't have any equity in their house. So there was programs that were funded that were helped Main Street. They did bail out a lot of banks, but there was, 500, 600, 700 banks that failed. And a lot of bankers got hurt because they were out of a job. So there was some pain. And even, the Wall Street big firms that got TARP money, their executives had to take pay cuts. And they had to give warrants to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government did very well. Actually, the U.S. government did extremely well from Fannie and Freddie. They put $190 billion into Fannie and Freddie, and they got over $300 billion back. So there was some toing and froing. But if we had not done something like TARP, we would have had a second depression. I mean, and so that's the trade-off you have to make. Yes, you bailed out some bigger guys, but that's the trade-off that was being made, and it was not just a U.S. problem. It was going to be, and it was a global financial crisis.
Okay, James, one of the reasons that is because you're on the inside and you know exactly how government works, right?
Well, sometimes it doesn't work, but
let me explain what I'm saying though. When I got the information about this interview, I looked at it first, and I said, well, I've seen you before. And then I said, I really want to talk to this guy because I want to ask some questions about why certain things were done. And it really concerns me when I hear that, we did this because, we were in free fall. Don't you think it was, you know your work very well. You're very good at what you do. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Why didn't you simply take the banks over, nationalize the banks?
Well, effectively, that's the FDIC job, not the job I have.
Right. I
But
get it.
what they did is they closed them down, and they then sold them off to other banks or private equity groups. I was actually in a private equity group, and we probably bought 5, 6, 7 banks, and had to put a lot of money into rescuing them. One of the important things the FDIC did was make sure that depositors didn't lose any money. And again, that's a very Main Street thing. And with all due respect to the U.S. government, I'm not sure they'd be a good manager of banks.
What value?
And tell you, one of the problems we had at Fannie.
I'm sorry.
One of the problems we had at Fannie and Freddie is there was legislation that created them, or they were already created, but that allowed them to write mortgages on 100 to 1 capital. So they needed $1 for every $100 they put in mortgages. And as soon as mortgage prices went down even a little bit, they were underwater. And yet Congress would not change that law. We worked on it for 3 years for Congress to change the law. Guess when they did change the law? 40 days before we had to put them in the conservatorship. So it's, yes, I wish Congress could do a better job. Yes, I wish government could manage things better. But I'm not quite sure that nationalizing banks would have been the right answer.
So let me ask you this, because like I said, I gave you all the kudos that deservedly up front, right? And you worked for government. And I think, let's back up, because you said Congress had this 100 to 1 ratio that it allowed with, and that actually expanded the money supply like hell. But they did that, right? But doesn't the private sector have a mind of its own that can say, this behavior from my bank is risky, and therefore, even though I can do it, I won't do it? Isn't the private sector supposed to be efficient in that manner, that it doesn't do things that will ultimately put it at risk?
Yeah, they should.
And if that is
many of them.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I agree with you that there was a lot of very bad practices then by banks and big banks and little banks, and community banks even. And it's sort of, the old saying that, when musical chairs, everybody was until the music stopped. And it's a problem.
It's a house of cards. We were talking about the house of cards for a very long time. I was talking as a progressive base back then, was talking about this house of cards way before we had the crash. And, remember Greenspan changed the rules. We were there. I just have this contention that we think the private sector is actually really more efficient than government, when we had you in government knowing what to get done.
Yeah, I would agree that certainly parts of the private sector are very inefficient, and certainly parts of the government are very inefficient too. One of the problems we have is we have too many government programs, is my opinion. We have, as I said in my book, it was a Ben Bernanke quote, but a lot of other people have used it as well, is the U.S. government is an insurance company with an army. We have...
That's a good one.
And it really is. We have 150 some government insurance programs out there, and people live off them. The private sector gets, pieces. I'm the chair of a museum, and if we borrow art from Europe, the government pays for the insurance. But there's lots of things, tree ones, everything you can think of. Obviously, flood is an important one. Pensions are a very important one that I manage. Fannie and Freddie have $6 trillion of mortgages now that they're guaranteeing.
You just said something I want to talk about, that pension one. Explain to our audience the thing about pensions. Let's say showing my age, I'm sorry. Let's say United Airlines decided that they couldn't afford their pension anymore. They could throw that stuff right to the government, and it is insured by the government. Explain that, because it seems to me like that is another giveaway to the private sector. But please go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, there's two kinds of pensions, as you know, the
Yeah.
401k and the defined, that's a defined contribution and defined benefit. The pension benefit guarantee company does the defined benefits, sort of the old fashioned plans,
Right.
which many of the big companies, especially the unionized companies, have. And what happens is if a company gets into big trouble, they tend not to fund their pension plan and it gets more and more underfunded. And then if the PBGC has to take over the plan if they declare bankruptcy and they can't afford the pension. The PBGC takes it over, but people don't get their full benefits. There's a
Mm-hmm.
haircut. And so that's painful for the individuals. And one of the things I always pushed is for the individuals in that kind of pension plan to put pressure on the companies to better fund the pension plans. And it's a problem. In the American Rescue Plan, there was a bailout of the PBGC's pension plans of like $80 billion
Mm-hmm.
for the multi-employer, that's the unionized plans, Teamsters being the biggest one. So it's there was a bailout there, and unfortunately, that's what happens when government creates an insurance program and then says it's not backed by the government. In theory, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation is a mutual and not guaranteed by the government, but of course, in the end of
It
the day,
is. Yeah.
just and Freddie were not guaranteed by the government, but at the end
It
of the
is.
day,
Yeah.
bailout. And so government creates these programs and does it poorly. And then when they need to be fixed, they don't get them fixed. And yes, the private sector takes advantage of that sometimes. But in the case we were talking about, some of the plans that went under in my day, TWA, Pan Am, Eastern, Continental went under but came
Mm-hmm.
back. A lot of the steel companies, Bethlehem, LTV, a whole series of steel companies went under and didn't come back. So oftentimes the management's out of a job. And the good news in some of those cases, the management had pensions that got cut as well.
But I guess what I'm saying, James, is for everything that we've just spoken about, right? The government did something bad with the insurance companies. These private sector folks, they're the ones that didn't pay into the pension. They're the ones that mismanage a company who would have needed this service of the government if they failed. But it's the government. Let me tell you what I think. I think we need a lot of people like you who wouldn't do what these people in the private sector have done and work in government and make it work. Government can only be as good as the people that's inside of government, right? That's what I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, there's a lot of recommendations in my book about how we can manage the government better as well. And we need to. I mean, we have like 3,000, maybe that more than that, political appointees. So every time there's a new president, we have a whole layer, and sometimes in the big departments, 3 or 4 layers down of political appointees, some of which got there because they gave money, or they got there because they worked on a campaign, and they often don't have the expertise for the agency they were running. And that is a problem that we have in our political system. If you go into the UK, I mean, as an example, political appointees are 1 layer, not 4 or 5 layers down. And it is a problem in our structure. And it's one of the things we need to reform is we need to, former President Trump and others talked about the deep state, if you will. And in my view, we have a lot of great people working in the government. All the agencies I ran, there was really people that are very devoted to, but they need leadership. And unfortunately, we keep cycling through the leaders, and we end up, not doing a good job. And Congress is not helping. And as you point out, the private sector does sometimes take advantage of that, and it's something we need to reform.
I don't know if I really have I really have a bone that I continuously pick with the corporate structure, and that is because I honestly think that the boogeyman really isn't the government, but the boogeyman is the private sector, and I believe in. And by the way, I believe in the private sector, the good part of the private sector that I really hope will exist at some time. I talk about a bifurcated market. I believe in having tremendous social programs, having people pay their fair due. And also, this has nothing to do with your book. I just want to see, I know that you're a pretty conservative guy. What do you think about billionaires?
About what?
Billionaires. Do you think anybody really earned being a billionaire?
Well, I'm not a billionaire, not even close. No,
But,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult issue because some of them have worked very hard for it, but when you have $1 billion, what do you do with it? Hopefully, you give it away, and you give it to charity.
But can you? But my question, though, James, is can you earn it?
In our system, you can earn it. Yes.
How?
You earn it.
Name me one billionaire that you think has earned their billion, and why?
Well, you can look at Musk as an example. He's built electric cars, which are an important environmental good. You can look at a lot of people in the financial side that made the money by trading securities, and you can argue either way on that one if you want to. But there's other people that have made their billions by building important institutions. But I have no problem with higher taxes for higher income people as long as it's done reasonably fairly.
I'm glad that you use Musk. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We have a giant deficit at this point in this country. Last year it was $2 trillion. This year it'll be 1.6. We have, gross debt of the United States at $34 trillion. And, we have a hole, and it has to be filled, and it has to be filled with taxes, but also better government, managing the programs better so we spend on things we should be spending on and not things we shouldn't be spending on. So again, I agree with you. There's issues in the private sector, but I also would say that there's issues in the government sector. That's why
we agree on that.
What it is, because I think we're underwater and sinking not only in the government but in parts of the private sector too. There's no doubt about it that we need better management.
Yeah, and the reason it wasn't a trick question when I asked you about, let's say, the billionaire. It's just that even Musk, as we speak, much of his income is derived from government grants, technology that was created by other people. I worked for NASA. I was an engineer at NASA for a long time. I got one salary to create, innovate, to invent. I want to ask you a thing here. I always talk to people about, people always tell me that the reason we need these excessive profits for billionaires, however they get their monies, etc., is the ability to innovate. Yet the innovators are actually like me, as an engineer who created software for the space station. I got paid once. Musk gets paid every single time something happens that somebody else builds for him. And henceforth, the question that I asked, has a billionaire really earned his billions? Every single thing that Musk has earned his money on, many of us created over time, from the Apollo program right on up. The technology to do a suborbital flight wasn't all that. I mean, I'm an engineer. It wasn't all that.
Yeah.
And so when I see billionaires like Musk or even Gates, I like Gates. I really do like Gates, but I'm a better programmer than Gates is. I've seen Gates's code, and that's not a joke. I'm a better programmer than Gates is. I would never be a billionaire, but his money didn't come from his innovation. His money came from his business acumen. Which these are the concepts that I try to get across to in the work that we do. Who earns it? Let's look at Brother James B. Lockhart III. You've written a great book. I scanned it through. I didn't see it all, but you've worked in government. You've gone in there and looked at the numbers and know that there's something that needs to be done. Your value to me is a lot more than Musk's value to our society. And I wonder, I am not trying to be nice here. I'm just saying, I'm wondering when we are going to realize who is actually making things better for society as a whole. And I don't think the billionaires are. I think people who are lifting up their cuffs and going out there and doing the work are. But anyway, that's enough of my sermon. Well, go ahead, answer if you want to.
Well, no, I mean, thank you for your government service. As I said, I think there's so many good people in the government that do a lot for American people. I would argue, at least in some of these companies, that the workers are getting stock options and whatever, so they're getting some piece of that pie. Obviously, not the biggest piece that Musk gets. Obviously,
exactly.
And he's
for being the puppet driver, right?
Yes. So I think the incentives should be reworked some way. I mean, in my agency, actually, we actually, and there's a few government agencies like this, that we actually were able to pay our workers more than, I think I had 25% of my staff making more than I was at the regulator, Fannie and Freddie, and we paid them bonuses. So we tried, and that's the kind of things in some government agencies more should be done, I think. We need to reward those good people that are willing to, work for a lot less than they could get in the private sector. And that's an important other thing we need to do in the government, is do a better job of rewarding the really bright people that are making things happen.
Well, look, let me tell you, we are coming out of time now. So what I'd like you to do is tell us why somebody needs, and I'm going to go ahead and tell folks. The book is America Underwater and Sinking. I think it's a book we should all read. It comes from the perspective of Brother James B. Lockhart III, who's had quite powerful jobs in the Bush administration and the Obama administration. In fact, is the second man in charge of Social Security. So anybody here on Social Security, if something goes wrong, look at the person on the screen right now. Anyway, tell us a little bit about why they should go ahead and pick up your book, and let's go from there.
Well, as the subtitle says, Time to Surface with Lessons Learned. And so there's a lot of lessons learned in there, talking about all these government programs that need to be worked, but also talking about how the private sector needs to do it better. So it's the story of my government career, and things that went wrong and things that went right. But from that, I'm trying to draw some lessons that are bigger than just my career. And there's a lot of things that should be done. And for instance, in Social Security at the moment, we need a commission of Congress to fix that, Republicans and Democrats, like we did at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I mean, there's programs that really need to be fixed for the American people to protect them, but also protect the deficits. Social Security, if we wanted to pay all the benefits that are scheduled over the next 75 years, we'd have to put in $22 trillion today and invest it. And so we have these big holes that we need to fill. So a lot of the book is saying, how do we fix these programs that we have created and protect the American people? And that's really the important message, is we need to fix government, working with the private sector, and protect the American people and reduce the deficits that are going to eat us up.
James B. Lockhart III, former Principal Deputy Commissioner and COO of the Social Security Administration, both under the Bush administration and partially under the Obama administration. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.